Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Growing up as a Super Nintendo owner, while the Street Fighter 2 games received a lot of playtime from myself, one other fighting game would receive just as much attention, with that of course being Killer Instinct. Whether you own a Super Nintendo version of this game, or were getting regular doses of its loud and proud arcade counterpart, Killer Instinct was one of the coolest games of its era. These titles by Rare that feature pre-rendered polygonal character models and lengthy, ridiculous flashy combos were like no games we'd ever seen before, delivering to us violent yet unforgettable experiences that echo through the ages. With regards to these games that got so many things right, it would be tough to talk about Killer Instinct without giving fair credit to its awesome roster of fighters. So, in today's episode, we are going to be highlighting one of the most iconic of all. If you have memories of these games, I would say that it is near impossible not to have this beastly figure's image etched into your brains. After all, not only was he one of the most striking looking combatants from this game, he was even on the bloody box art and cartridge label itself. Yes, I'm of course talking about Fulgore, an inhuman looking fighter who is arguably the face of the entire franchise. While a lot of you have played both as this character and against them, I am going to assume that beyond the chaotic fun that these games offer, that a lot of you still don't know a great deal about this imposing figure. So let me try and change that. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Killer Instinct's Fulgore. Let's bloody discuss what the hell he is. Yeah. I truly feel it is quite difficult to emphasize how freaking a big deal Killer Instinct was. You needed to be there to truly appreciate the scale of how much this game was beloved. The game was huge during my childhood and often the talk of the playground. We were completely fixated on the game's amazing sounds, graphics and insane combos. But of course none of this would have even been possible without the existence of Fulgore and co. Bursting onto the scene in 1994, the game would debut with 10 playable characters and one final boss. All of these fighters would share one basic story narrative that shares a lot in common with many other fighting games. In Killer Instinct's case, a powerful mega corporation known as Ultratech organised a tournament known as Killer Instinct. For Ultratech, this serves the purpose of them being able to test the strength of their experimental creatures against regular human participants. So after laying that brief bit of information out to you, you can probably guess which camp Fulgore falls under. So bearing this in mind, I guess we shouldn't be asking ourselves what is he, but more what is it? Well, it turns out that Fulgore in this game is a prototype cybernetic soldier developed by the mega corporation, who has been thrown into the tournament to further test his combat abilities. The idea being that if his abilities prove effective, then Ultratech can begin mass production of their creation. In a playthrough of Killer Instinct, Fulgore actually ends up serving as the penultimate boss in the game, highlighting just how dangerous this figure is. For those who chose to play as this man-made creation, Fulgore is Killer Instinct's version of a Shutokou fighter, which means in combat he utilises zoning and close quarter combat to try and outclass opponents, delivering moves such as a flying uppercut known as the plasma slice, the cyber dash allowing him to boost forward with his claws outstretched, along with variations of what is known as the laser storm, whereby he shoots bolts of energy from his claws. Fulgore is also capable of shooting a short laser from his eyes, and to confuse opponents he is even capable of teleporting behind them. To make matters far worse for foes, Fulgore also has a reflect barrier to deflect projectiles and can perform a combo breaker with one of his mean uppercuts. In the flashy world of Killer Instinct, moves like this can be heavily comboed together to make all sorts of insane sequences, but beyond this, Fulgore also has a range of finishers at his disposal. These include shooting a deadly red laser from his eyes that can destroy opponents, or change his head into an automated turret to gun them down. Further to this, if Fulgore is feeling really sassy, he can perform what is known as humiliation, where he simply forces his fallen foe to dance for him. Amazing. As Fulgore fights in combat, he makes some rather disturbing unearthly noises. According to the original Killer Instinct's artist, Kevin Bayliss, these weird noises were made by mixing synth effects with pig squeals, as they wanted Fulgore to sound as unhuman as possible, resulting in the robotic screaming we all know today. Fulgore in this game is said to have been programmed to be a cold and heartless killing machine that simply follows orders without question and deadly accuracy, instantly drawing lines with the Terminator from the first movie. As for his character design, when you take a closer look at the character, it instantly becomes clear that his form draws a lot of parallels with fully armoured medieval knights, which I guess makes sense considering that they were soldiers who were programmed to follow strict orders too. Building on this to make the character all the more intimidating and robotic looking, he has glowing red eyes slanted in a death glare, and the knight side of his design is further emphasised through the orange plume extending from the back of his helmet. As for his frame, while built in the form of a humanoid, some of his circuitry and electrical tubing is showing off the mechanical aspect of this creation. Rather disturbingly, in regards to his appearance in the first game, dark rumours surround this frightening entity that suggest that Fulgore is more than simply artificial intelligence. In fact, it is speculated that amongst all of his tubing and circuitry, there are actual human body parts and organs which have been harvested during an operation in Russia. Because yes, of course the Russians are guilty of being behind everything. Sneaky little buggers. If one is able to beat the game as this mysterious menace, it is obviously revealed that Ultratech's combat test was a complete success, and the company can swiftly begin their mass production run. As for the fighters gamers have just played through as, their fate is a little less positive, as this Model 1 version of Fulgore is instantly deactivated and placed in a museum, to mark a turning point in history. To make matters worse, the only people who have the opportunity to ever see this relic are now slaves of Ultratech. So that marked the first appearance of Fulgore, a killing machine that executes action with perfect efficiency. But of course, this would not be the last Killer Instinct game, so what for their arc within Killer Instinct 2? Well, Killer Instinct 2 would see the debut of the Mark II model of Fulgore, a fighter who mostly retained the same design as the original. However, the mechanical monster has been made less bulky and more streamlined this time. They have also gained streaks of metallic blue lining on their arms, torso and legs, and have new yellow highlights on the chest plates. Further to this, Fulgore's iconic metallic blades have now been infused with superheated plasma. Like other fighters in Killer Instinct 2, Fulgore gains a variety of super moves, including being able to lock onto opponents to execute his triple laser storm. They also have gained the ability to turn temporarily invisible and perform other souped up versions of its established arsenal of moves. Fulgore also has a new finisher, whereby it can call upon a massive laser to strike opponents from above, reducing them to nothing but gore, making Fulgore more scary than ever. Rather than being placed in a museum, the canon from the previous game suggests that the original Fulgore was destroyed in combat by Jago, suggesting that the cyborg failed to live up to Ultratech's expectations. So, past this point, the scientists at Ultratech would scramble to make a new and improved, updated Fulgore. Due to Jago being the one who destroyed their expensive bit of technology, the new model would be programmed specifically to destroy the man who destroyed the Model 1 unit. This in turn would make Fulgore Model 2 more Terminator-like than ever, with one single-minded objective that they seek to accomplish. A novelty factor that Killer Instinct 2 would bring to the table would be that each character in the game had their own 2 to 4 endings each, meaning we could see how different results would play out for the characters of this universe under different sets of circumstances. The game therefore outlays 4 different fates for Fulgore, involving who he does or doesn't kill. If Fulgore kills both Jago and Orchid, nothing stands in the way of the cyborg, and it builds a robotic army in its image, and Earth falls under his mercy. If it kills Jago, but leaves Orchid alive on the other hand, Orchid comes back with agents to perform a deadly strike, ending the Ultratech threat forever. Killing Orchid and not Jago sees Jago battle Fulgore with the world resting in his hands. However, if Fulgore fails to kill either of them, the price for the cyborg is high, as their combined might results in its complete destruction. Outside of the Nintendo 64's rejigged version of Killer Instinct 2, known as Killer Instinct Gold, which would not receive character designs and a new story of its own, it would be safe to assume for many years that this would be the last we would ever see of the franchise. 17 years later though, Killer Instinct would finally return, with the Xbox One delivering to us a new installment in the franchise that would simply be titled Killer Instinct, which would finally allow us to learn more about this enigmatic fighter. This game, which was released way into the new millennium, was a reboot of a series, but it would still retain elements from the prior game's plots that it would look to build on. This would include the introduction of Fulgore Mark III. Once this new prototype is online, once again it exists with just one singular directive. In this game's case, eliminating all enemies of Ultratech. While this is the case, there is however also one very key difference about this new Fulgore, in that this time around, the mind of the machine is different. This Fulgore can plan, is self-aware, can feel emotion, and somehow even feels human. Being a game that was released so many years after the previous entry in the series, the fighting system is vastly different from the prior titles in the series, which helps lead to a number of differences in the way Mark III performs in combat. Unique to this fighter is his reactor gauge, which functions differently to other characters' shadow gauges. Fulgore can use it to hold more shadow stock than nearly any character in the game, but cannot gain stock by blocking like a number of other fighters. Fulgore's arsenal of moves is made deeper than ever before as well, with standout techniques such as a shadow attack known as the Devastation Beam. This sees Fulgore open its chest to fire a massive screen-filling laser beam that does absolutely devastating damage to opponents. Perhaps most flashy and satisfying of all though is Fulgore's new ultimate finisher. Now via pressing some buttons on their arm before kicking an opponent away, Fulgore then flies into the air to release a supercharged devastation beam, resulting in a beam twice the size as normal, engulfing an opponent, reducing them to nothing more than ash. In fact, to further show what a bad motherfucker they are, Fulgore stands in the smouldering aftermath, taking in the victory. This third model of Fulgore would function as the final opponent for arcade mode of Season 1 of the game, and through experiencing the game we can learn more about why Fulgore is now experiencing human emotion. It transpires that the cyborg is developing self-awareness and define its own programming due to having residual memories of Eagle, Thunder's missing younger brother, whose mind was used as a blueprint for Fulgore's neural network, illustrating that the link between Fulgore and humans to be sickeningly true. Echoing back to Killer Instinct 2 all those years prior, there are once again multiple endings in Killer Instinct 2013 that differ whether Fulgore is killed, Orchid, or both. In one ending it shows Fulgore overcoming their own programming and not killing Orchid. Fulgore cannot ignore his imperative to destroy, but human memories interfere with his machine logic. Unable to digest the echoes of a fighting spirit, Fulgore attempts to process his true nature. In another ending, one by which they do kill Orchid, the prototype is approved and echoes of a lost humanity are purged from Fulgore's system. The sum of what remains is a merciless machine, driven to destroy. Without a cycle spared to savour his victories, Fulgore begins a search for his next adversary. There is also an ending that shows thousands of Fulgores have been created, only to be destroyed, remade and improved upon. But this one is different. Individuality and independence now race through his circuits. Still a killing machine, Fulgore rejects his coded imperatives and ponders his next target. While this 2013 game would be the first time that links between Eagle and Fulgore existed in the video games, in other media sources their links spanned back to 1996, through the Killer Instinct comic book series. Comic books would also show that Fulgore has a human face behind its chassis, and also imply that the cyborg's internal organs had been illegally harvested by Ultratech from somewhere in Russia, like we alluded to earlier. In other video games, Fulgore would cameo alongside 5 other Killer Instinct characters within Viva Pinata, Trouble in Paradise, all as vision cards. Further to this, the character would be referenced in the controversial Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts via a weapon in the game that can be unlocked by players known as Fulgore's Fist. Thinking about it, I am still very salty that somehow Banjo made it into Smash Bros before Fulgore, as this move doesn't even make sense, considering that not only is Killer Instinct an actual fighting game like Smash Bros, the Killer Instinct series also sold much better than the Banjo games too. More people purchased Killer Instinct on the Super Nintendo than who purchased Banjo on the Nintendo 64, and more people played Killer Instinct on the Xbox One than Nuts and Bolts on the 360. And that's before we even mention the 500 million times people played the Killer Instinct arcade cabinets, and the 10 million people who were registered to be playing the Xbox Killer Instinct game online in 2017. Thinking about it, it is actually criminal that Fulgore has not been added to Smash Bros, as no fighting game character who is so heavily associated with the Nintendo brand is anywhere close to as significant as Fulgore. Well, apart from Black Orchid of course, but her story is potentially an interesting one for another time. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Fulgore. I hope I was able to outlay to you today just how important this character, or characters, depending on how you look at it, is to gaming overall, and you now have a clearer idea in your mind exactly what a Fulgore is. If you enjoyed this video and want more retrospectives on Killer Instinct's deep roster, then be sure to share the hell out of this video in as many places as possible, because thus far I have found it difficult to get views on any character based video who is not a roster member from a Street Fighter game. So share this about and comment below which fighter you would like to see me highlight next. Videos like this are in part made possible due to the amazing people who back my work via Patreon. Speaking of whom, special mentions go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Sebastian Velez, Heyo Paula Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corey Omar Sr., Ryan Dinch, Evan Border, Philip Manth, Azra Arkai, Dropkin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs. SNG, Homers Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang Hee, Norma Sticks, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Vladimir Renee, Marvin Liga, TOG Driver, Lewis Vian, John Bates, David Bauer, Chris Fisk, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, Steve, Awesome Jacket Dude, and everybody else who backs my work over on the Patreon platform. Thank you so much for all of your support. Yeah, cheerio.